December 1980, over 3 consecutive nights, find out that an uncorrelated target had been tracked on radar directly over the base, was there for a few sweeps, and then had disappeared. It wasn't clear whether some of the witnesses were being given all this to deliberately jumble their memories of this, to maybe hide the reality of what they'd encountered. So I didn't need the security clearance for the UFO job, but part of the job involved working alongside people in defense intelligence staff, so scientific and technical intelligence folks. And they wouldn't sit down and talk to you openly unless you had that higher level of security. So my predecessor had it because of his Gulf War work. My successor actually had it because she had done a briefing job associated with special forces. But not everyone over the history of that job had it. And I think those people kind of got cut out a bit.
Some of the other people, though, whether it be the person before you, the person after you, or the other people after them, has there been anyone who worked that desk who is as publicly open or publicly open at all like you are?
No. In fact, only one person had previously spoken openly about that, and that was a former head of the division.
What division?
Of Secretariat Air Staff, the whole division.
Got it.
So 25, 30 people, whatever it was. And so that individual sat at a much higher grade, and his name was Ralph Noyce. And he, after he retired, he spoke about his time being head of that division. And he said, well, one of the things that our division did was the UFOs. And he said, now, I was not the desk officer doing it, but I was the head of the division. So, of course, his opinion on this and his involvement was very important because he was someone who had a degree of oversight of this. And somewhat bizarrely, he actually wrote a fictional book called A Secret Property, which was a thinly disguised fictional retelling of the Rendlesham Forest incident, which was Britain's best-known UFO case.
Can you walk us through that? That's actually a great segue.
Oh, it is, isn't it?
How a lot of people in America, I just heard about this recently, but a lot of us, we don't know this story like we know Roswell and everything. So can you just go through the whole thing?
Sure. And it is, I think, the best case we had in our files. It took place in December 1980, so by the time I joined, it was already over 10 years in the past. I later did a cold case review of it, but it was my predecessor, or one of my predecessors, who did the actual contemporaneous investigation. So the story of Rendlesham, December 1980, over 3 consecutive nights, the early hours of December 26th, then the 27th, then the 28th, there was activity. This took place at 2 military bases, Bentwaters and Woodbridge. Now, they were U.S. Air Force bases on British soil, so they were part of the wider U.S. military presence in Europe. And on the first night of activity, and Bentwaters and Woodbridge are a couple of miles apart, and Rendlesham Forest lies between them.
And what part of the island are we on?
This is, I guess you would call it, the county was Suffolk.
Got it. Can we pull this up, Alessi? Just on a map.
It's, it's I don't know, 50, somewhere between 50 and 80 miles northeast of London.
Okay.
Fairly
got it.
Close to the coast.
I was going to say, it's going to be right up on the coast. So there's 2 bases separated by the Rendlesham.
By Rendlesham.
How do you pronounce it?
Rendlesham.
Rendlesham Forest.
Yeah. And on the first night of activity, some security police and law enforcement personnel saw strange multicolored lights in the forest. And their first thought was maybe a light aircraft has crashed. Maybe there's a fire. we should kind of go out there immediately and investigate. Well, they found out that there wasn't an aircraft crash. Nothing like that had been reported. But they did find out that an uncorrelated target had been tracked on radar directly over the base, was there for a few sweeps, and then had disappeared. So again, that was maybe indicative that something had come down, but no aircraft had been reported missing or anything like that. No distress calls had been sent in or anything. But nonetheless, they thought, well, something's going on. Let's go out and investigate. So a number of different people went out there, maybe about half a dozen, but then their radios started malfunctioning. And these were line-of-sight radios, so sometimes it was just topography, but this was kind of talking to the guys in later years. They said, we know what our radios did and didn't do, and this was unusual. So they set up a radio relay, which was just pretty low-tech in a sense. It just meant, well, leave one guy back there, then another guy another few hundred yards in, and if we can't relay a message back to base, we'll relay a message to the last guy behind us, and he can relay a message to the next guy, because what I'm saying is that the range of the radios seemed to have markedly dropped. So at the end of all this, 3 people kind of approached something, and over 40 years on now, if you talk to some of these guys, they all have different recollections now over what exactly they saw and encountered. One of them talks about it in terms of being a structured craft that had landed, not crashed. One of them talks about it in terms of just being a really intense light. A lot of these characters have had some fairly aggressive debriefings from their own chain of command, both being interrogated by Air Force Office of Special Investigations, but also the use of regression hypnosis.
Regression hypnosis?
Yeah.
What is that?
Where you hypnotize someone, take them back to the incident, and say, now give us your recollections. Because sometimes the feeling is the conscious memory has lost something or blocks something.
Wow.
And there might be something in the subconscious. It's very controversial, because some people say, no, it can actually create false memories. But it was a technique that was and maybe still is used from time to time. As I say, there are mixed opinions on its value, but also drugs were used. Sodium pentothal, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, sort of truth serums. And again, it wasn't clear, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, by the way.
This is wild.
But it wasn't clear whether some of the witnesses were being given all this to deliberately jumble their memories of this, to maybe hide the reality of what they'd encountered, or maybe the chain of command really wanted to know and thought there's more details here than these people have consciously recalled. So that's one of many, many controversial areas of this case.
How big were they initially reporting they thought the craft was, approximately?
Well, Jim Peniston, who was, I think, a sergeant or a staff sergeant at the time, he is the one that talks most definitively about this in terms of it being a structured craft. He estimates maybe about 9 feet across at the base, kind of triangular in shape, almost like a lunar landing module, so sort of tapering, moving upwards, maybe 9 feet tall, but, and this is the really surreal and bizarre thing, with strange symbols, almost like hieroglyphic symbols on the side of this thing.
They could see that?
He talks about that.
How far away is this craft?
Jim's testimony is that he went right up to it and touched it. And,
oh, shit.
And he said when he touched it, he got a kind of almost like a mental shock or something, and something changed in the feel and the brightness of the craft, and he immediately thought, oops, I shouldn't have done that. And he's like, one of Jim's specialisms was aircraft recognition. He was one of these people that could see a silhouette on a flash card and immediately go, that's a MiG-29, or that's an F-16, or that. And he's like, this is not an aircraft. This is like not, it's like a lunar landing module or something, but it isn't.
You didn't see any creatures or anything.
No.
So it wasn't of the
There
third
are
kind.
stories about that, but the witnesses who talk about that, they, so far as I can tell, are just wannabes who've written themselves into the story over the years. The people who are actually verifiably there, and when I say verifiably, because we have their after-action reports, as part of the U.S. Air Force files, for example. So we know who was there and who wasn't. So I don't take reports of entities seriously.